His name was Vincent van Gogh, but let's call him Vincent because he called himself Vincent, realizing no one would ever pronounce his last name correctly. He was born in Holland and studied to be a preacher until he found his spiritual calling was actually to paint pictures. Although he only painted for about 10 years, today he is considered one of the greatest artists who ever lived. In the century since he lost his mind and shot himself through the heart at the age of 37, millions of words have been written analyzing almost every aspect of Vincent's brief life. What was it that I still yearned to know about him? What could I discover that others hadn't? It's always been a dream of mine to follow in the footsteps of my favorite painters and to go to their studios and to see what they saw and paint what they painted. And you know, as you get older, you think, I have all these dreams, there are all these things I want to do. Well, if not now, when? So last summer I decided I would go on a pilgrimage to find Van Gogh's ghost and paint with him. So I traveled halfway around the world to the town of Arles in the south of France to track down the little yellow house where Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin lived together for a couple of months and hoped to create a studio of the South to pursue what they hoped would be new directions in modern art. In the tranquil, sun-filled setting of his yellow house, Vincent could live, breathe, think, and paint. It is here that he painted no less than 7 still lives of sunflowers during the summer of 1888 and the winter of 1889, describing the sunflower as his symbol for the concept of gratitude. When copying his paintings, he would say, "My brush goes between my fingers as a bow would on a violin, and absolutely for my own pleasure." Now, I know what the little yellow house looked like. Everybody knows what the yellow house looks like because, well, this is one of his most famous paintings. And this is the little yellow house where he and Paul Gauguin lived together. Gauguin's room was there and Vincent's room was here. They shared a little studio downstairs and there was a little closet in the kitchen. There was no privacy. It got pretty claustrophobic, especially during the winter when they were forced to be inside a lot. What was it about this place that inspired such masterpieces? To find out, I decided to stalk Vincent's ghost through the golden glow of his beloved Provençal countryside. My first stop would be the drawbridge that he drew and painted so many times. I'd heard that it's been reconstructed just outside of town, so I went out and I planted myself in his shadow, and I painted what Van Gogh painted. The most interesting thing I noticed actually being here is how much it feels like being in a Van Gogh painting. I mean, when you look at Vincent's paintings and you see the brushstrokes and all the marks and all the slashing and all the movement and all the passion he put into his paintings, you think, well, this must be the work of a madman. But when you're actually standing on Vincent's bridge and you feel the mistral wind whipping across the canal, you begin to feel what he felt when he was standing here. And when you look at the countryside from his point of view, and you look in the sky and you see the clouds whipped by the wind, and the trees are whipped with their own rhythm, and the wind pounding against your skin has its own rhythm. The ripples in the water have their own rhythm, but it's different from the reeds that are along the shore. You almost feel the wind dancing with the cypress trees. Every type of vegetation undulates to its own graceful beat in this beautiful wind. So in fact, he was depicting what it felt like to be here. And in doing so, he created a dimension of modern art that no one had ever done before. In order to capture the moment, Vincent worked quickly, often applying his brush strokes in an impasto so thick that it took up to a year for the paint to dry. As I turned to leave, I saw this odd vision. A statue? A memorial? A ghost? But as I got closer, I realized the horrifying truth. Vincent has become so famous, he now has his own action figure. It even comes with interchangeable heads, with or without the ear he so famously cut off in Arles in 1888. What had happened here that elevated Van Gogh from crazy artist to an immortal legend? During Vincent's stay at Arles, which lasted 444 days, he made around 200 paintings, over 100 drawings, and wrote 200 letters. When Vincent lived here, his neighbors filed a petition to have him banished to a mental institution. But by the 21st century, he is their favorite citizen, and every place he worked has a plaque that shows where he was when he made the painting. This park is where Vincent took Gauguin during their first days together. They painted the same view, but facing opposite directions. The two men painted in entirely different ways. Gauguin saying, "I shut my eyes in order to see." He warned Vincent to not copy nature too much. Art is an abstraction. Study nature, then brood on it and treasure the creation that will result. Vincent, on the other hand, was endlessly inspired by what he saw. Admitting the emotions that come over me in the face of nature can be so intense that I faint. When I have a terrible need of, shall I say the word, religion, then I go out and I paint the stars. In early December, Vincent paints Paul's portrait. Gauguin responds by immortalizing Vincent as the painter of sunflowers. But when Vincent sees his portrait, he's horrified, telling Gauguin, "You have captured me, but it is me gone mad." They argued endlessly and rarely saw anything eye to eye. We can only imagine how bad it got when 2 days before Christmas in 1888, according to Gauguin, Vincent became increasingly agitated, and their conversation turned to sainthood, madness, and murder. Vincent freaked out and fled into the night. The next morning, there was a crowd out front, and the yellow house was spattered in blood. Vincent had cut off his own left earlobe with a razor, then took the severed piece to a girl at a nearby brothel. Gauguin left on the night train for Paris, and the two men would never see each other again. And it's only long after they're gone do we recognize that this was a magic time in a magic place in a little yellow house in France. Well, I've found the yellow house, or at least where it used to be. Unfortunately, it was blown to smithereens during World War II, and now it's just a busy traffic corner. But as I got closer, I saw there was still a little yellow house here. Very little. The mailbox was bright yellow. Even though Vincent and Paul's ghosts probably weren't here anymore, I stuck my own version of Vincent's ghost back on the yellow house. So any geeks like me who come looking for ghosts will at least be able to find something. By early 1889, it was clear Vincent couldn't take care of himself anymore, and he voluntarily checked into the asylum in Saint Remy. His diagnosis was epilepsy, causing terrifying audio and visual hallucinations and horrifying nightmares. Convinced work would restore his health, he worked feverishly, and within the first months here, he painted Starry Night, the irises, the almond branches, the olive trees, and so many, many more. But while he was here, he also tries several times to poison himself by swallowing his oil paints or drinking kerosene. His time in Saint Remy is boring and lonely. These are days before cell phones and computers, even before electric light. How does he pass his time? He writes letters, 700 in all, mostly to his brother Theo. And it's through these letters that we get a glimpse into the artist's soul. Walking up the stone steps to the cell where Vincent was confined is kind of eerie. It looks familiar because you've seen it in all the drawings and paintings. The first thing you notice when you look out the window is the enclosed garden that he painted so often. When Vincent arrived in Saint Remy, he wrote, "The country here is so beautiful, and the air is such a splendid blue, and what a sun. But all that I've seen so far is the garden outside my window. I am at peace here." We're here in the little cell in the asylum at Saint Remy where Van Gogh lived and painted. Of all the studios we've come to visit, this is perhaps the most pathetic. All we have is a little bed and a chair, and I don't know if it actually was Vincent's chair, but they found one that had paint on it. Yes, it's Vincent's room at the asylum, but it's also his studio. It's also where he dreams. It's also where, when he looks out this window, he doesn't see the bars. During Vincent's lifetime, this field produced the wheat to feed the patients. But now in the 21st century, they no longer need to make their own bread. So last summer, they planted the field in sunflowers. So as I looked out Vincent's window, there were thousands of sunflowers. And I decided I simply must paint them. So I ran to the car and I grabbed my paints and brushes and I went out into the field. And I set up my watercolors and I began to paint what I now consider to be Vincent's sunflowers. And there, with his room in the background, I begin to paint the sunflowers. Suddenly, there's a black cloud that blows right over me and begins to rain pretty much just on me. And because I'm painting in watercolor, as soon as the paint hits the paper, it washes off. Where's my mark? It's gone. It's here, it's gone. I can't paint, I can't make a mark. What's going on? And I'm getting pelted and it's getting wet, and my camera's getting wet. And I think, okay, I'm gonna go back into Vincent's little cell and summon the ghost to find out what he wants. Entering his room, I felt the presence of the master. I mean, this was the place he was confined for over a year as he struggled to control his demons. Was Vincent's spirit still here? So I went over and sat in the paint-splattered chair next to Vincent's cot. And I looked around the room and I summoned the spirit and I asked, "Vincent, what do you want?" And the ghost came to me and said, "I want to paint with you. Painting's the only time I've ever felt alive." So I went back to the car and I brought out my statue of Vincent and I set him up next to me in the garden and I let him have fun. And by some quirk of fate or miracle or other ghostly occurrence, that little black cloud blew away and we had beautiful sunshine to paint our sunflowers together. Well, I don't know if I made the ghost dream come true, but I sure know I made my dreams come true. And before I left, I decided I needed to take one memento, just to say that's actually happened. So I grabbed a sunflower, and I've still got it. Now, as I'm carrying my sunflower out of there, I'm thinking, I think we need to begin the cycle anew. It isn't enough to bring back a dead sunflower. So I went to a local nursery in Arles and I asked if they had any tournesol, the flowers that turn their faces to the sun, the sunflowers that Vincent loved to paint, his trademark image. And sure enough, I bought a package of sunflower seeds in Arles. So these are actually the great-great-great-great-grandchildren of Vincent's sunflowers, probably 120 generations removed. So although I couldn't afford to buy one of Vincent's sunflower paintings, clever lad that I am, I took the seeds and I planted them in my own backyard. I watered them and I tended them and I watched them grow. And finally, when they were big enough, I made my own sunflower painting. As I lost myself in a world of yellow and orange and green, I didn't notice the little black rain cloud that blew over and started to rain on me and wash my painting away again. This time, I was stubborn. No matter how wet I got, I wouldn't give up. Do I really think it was Vincent's ghost visiting me again? Sure, Vincent's spirit visits artists all the time. Anytime an artist is inspired by his vision, his dedication, and his wonderful paintings, Vincent's spirit lives on.